You know how a lot of times we'll hear that a person has some kind of an accident or they're having surgery and they die and they find themselves floating above their bodies looking down. Then they become aware of a tunnel. And as they start going down this tunnel, there's a white light at the end. And they're met by somebody, either a relative, a loved one, a family friend, someone that they know, who tells them, it's not your time. You have to go back. My whole story begins on the other side of that white light. I was born in California, and my dad was involved in sales for his whole life. And one year, he won a sales contest, and part of what he won were these mopeds, or what we call scooters today. And we used to ride these all over the neighborhood. But one day I was out riding, and I slammed into a tree, and the way that I landed, I tore the tendons off my right hand. And I needed to go into surgery to have them reattached. Well, at the time of this happened, I was only 21, and I had never had surgery before, and I had never really even been in a hospital very often, so I didn't know what to expect. So my mom drives me down to this clinic, and we go into the operating room. I get up on the gurney. They start to give me the anesthesia, and I had some kind of horrible reaction to the anesthesia, and it stopped my heart. I died. The very next second, I was standing in the most beautiful building I have ever seen. It was beautiful white marble, and it was so long, I could not see the end of this building. And my first thought was, oh my gosh, I had no idea the hospital was this big, because I didn't know that I had died. This whole journey that I was on, I didn't even know that I died until it was already over. So I'm standing in this building. In my left ear, I hear, "My name is Alan. I'm your spirit guide." And he started to tell me everything I was seeing. Everything he showed me, every place he took me to, he was talking to me the entire time in my ear. And I remembered every single thing that he said. He said where I was inside the orientation center. This is where souls come when they finish a lifetime. So I looked over to my right, and all the way down, as far as I could see, were these huge marble white columns, maybe 20 or 30 feet high and about 6 feet apart, all the way down as far as you could see. In the middle of this building where I was standing, there were all these tables, about the size of an average kitchen table, going again all the way down about 6 feet apart. And at every one of these tables, there were two people sitting there. And my guide said, these are orientation counselors. And then on my left-hand side, when I looked to my left, it was all marble, and it looked like doorways had been cut out of solid marble. They were tunnels. And these tunnels are what people come through. So when a person passes, they go down the tunnel. And when they go into the white light, they end up in the orientation center. And my guide, Alan, said, look at the next tunnel. So I looked up. There was a man coming through. He was an elderly gentleman, probably in his 80s or 90s, and he was doing this. He had his right hand over his chest like he had chest pain. And my guide said he just passed from a heart attack. So there was a woman that was sitting at this table who was closest to that tunnel, and she stood up. She walked over to him. She took his hands in hers, and she led him back to the table, and they sat down across from each other. So then she starts talking to him, and I'm too far away, so I can't hear what she's saying. But my guide, Alan, said what their job is, these orientation counselors, is they help people remember where they're from. Because what happens when we come into a lifetime, very few of us remember where we're from. Because we're not from Earth. We're from heaven or the other side, the afterlife, whatever you want to call it. That's home. Earth is just a place we come to temporarily. And so their orientation counselors tell them, you just finished your life, you passed from a heart attack or an accident, and now you're back home again. And my guide said to watch him. So I'm watching her talk to this gentleman that just passed, and all of a sudden, he began to change. He started changing from an elderly gentleman into a young man in his 30s. So this man finishes this talk, this conversation with this orientation counselor. He changes back to who he really is on the other side, and he stands up and he walks to these columns. He walks down 3 steps into what I call the gardens, the most beautiful, gigantic, large gardens you've ever seen, with emerald green grass and flowers and trees. It was beautiful. And there were all these people there. And my guide said, what's happening now is this gentleman is going to have his reunion. And what that meant was all the people that he knew in his lifetime that passed before him, like parents, grandparents, friends, other family, everybody was there waiting for him. The reason that all those people were there is because when people come to Earth for a lifetime, it's a really big deal because Earth is such a hard planet to be. I was told it's one of the hardest of all the other worlds. And just the fact that somebody comes here, they have to be a fighter or a warrior. You have to be tough to come to a place like Earth. And so all these people were there to congratulate him. And that's going to happen for all of us. We all have these reunions when we get back. So then what happened is my guide, Alan, took me on this journey to all these different places. So the first place he takes me to is this gigantic, beautiful white marble building, this rectangle building with all the marble columns all along the outside. So we go to the inside, and he takes me to a room that is a round room. It looked like a round movie theater, perfectly round. And above me were all these movie screens, just like you would go to see in a movie theater. And there must have been 15 or 20 of these different screens above my head. And my guide said, this is the life review. All of a sudden, every one of these movie screens lit up, and they all started playing movies about me. Every screen had a different episode of my life playing. One screen had an episode of me as a newborn. Another screen had me as an infant. Another one had me as a toddler. Another one had me my first day of kindergarten. And it was like watching my life on every single one of these screens. And what's interesting about this is that my guide said, the life review is the greatest teacher of the soul. And what happens is we can actually feel how our actions in our lifetime affected other people. If you intentionally hurt somebody, you will actually feel what that feels like when you have your life review. And my guide, Alan, said that is the greatest teacher of the soul, because that's what teaches people that it's not okay to hurt people. It's not okay to kill people. It's not okay to commit violence. That's how it was told to me, that's how the soul learns. So the next place he takes me to is this other gigantic building full of these gorgeous white marble columns. And these buildings were so large we have nothing here on Earth to compare them to, just gigantic buildings. So we go to the inside, and he takes me to what we would call today looked like a modern movie theater. And there was this big screen up front. And my guide, Alan, said, I'm going to show you past lifetimes. So the screen lights up, and there's a movie playing, but it's a movie about my life. And I didn't look like I look now, but I just knew watching this that this was me. And I was an elderly gentleman. I had a shaved head. I had a red gown or a robe on, and I was in a monastery. And my job in that lifetime was to teach kids how to become monks. And that life was somewhere in Southeast Asia. And then the screen turned off. He said, I'm going to show you another one. The screen comes back on, and it's me again. But this time I'm pushing a wooden wheelbarrow, and I've got all of these shoes stacked inside this wheelbarrow. And in that lifetime, what I did is I fixed people's shoes. And apparently I had some kind of a shop or something where I would fix the shoes. Then I was pushing the wheelbarrow on a cobblestone street, and I would take the shoes once they were fixed and drop them back off at everybody's house or village. And then, that life took place somewhere in Eastern Europe. And then that one disappeared. And my guide said, I want to show you one more lifetime. So the screen lights up, and it's me again, and I'm standing in a little wooden rickety boat. And it was either on a lake or an ocean. And I had this net that I was casting into the water. And I was pulling it back over hand like this, hand over fist. My guide said that we can have as many lifetimes as we want to, because we are as eternal as God is eternal. We have always been. So it's very rare if a soul only has one lifetime. But it's also up to the soul, it's up to the individual soul, that if they want to come into a lifetime, they certainly can, but nobody forces them to. And he told me that the reason that we come into a lifetime in the first place, he said, is to experience the things we can't experience on the other side. Because the other side is a perfect world. It's the place that God created for us for eternity. There's no wars, there's no hunger, there's no homelessness, there's no disease. Nothing negative is over there. Most of us learn by going through something tough. We learn by the hard times. And that's why we come to a place like Earth, because that's how we learn the most. On the other side, back home again, we can still learn things. We just can't experience anything negative to test ourselves. And that's one of the primary reasons why we leave a place like the other side and come to a place like Earth to learn and to develop, and also secondarily to help other people on their journey too. So we leave that building, and he takes me to another building. This one was beautiful. I mean, they were all beautiful, but this one was a round, gigantic building. And it had white marble columns all along the circumference of this big round building. And there was a huge dome on top. And my guide said, this is where we go when we plan a lifetime. So we go inside, and he walks me up to this marble table. And sitting on the top of this marble table is a scroll. And it looked like Egyptian papyrus paper. Kind of that brown, old coloring kind of scroll. It looked like that. And it was all round up. And it had a blue ribbon around it. And I picked it up, I took off the ribbon, and I laid the scroll out like this on the table. And my guide, Alan, told me that every single one of us plans the major events of a lifetime before we come in. And we take one of these scrolls and we write down everything we want to accomplish. We put things down like what country we're going to be born into, what language are we going to learn, Are we going to go to a university or a school? What kind of career are we going to have? Are we going to have kids? Are we going to get married? All these major things go into planning a lifetime. So I looked down at the scroll, and when I tried to read it, it folded up like this, and I wasn't able to read what it said. And I think the reason was because if I had known some of the things I wanted to experience in this lifetime, if I knew ahead of time what they were, I may have done something to interfere with what I was supposed to learn. So I wasn't able to read it. And my guide said that when we come back from a lifetime, when we finish that life, we come back to this building, we get our scroll, and we look at it to see how we did. So I looked to my right, and on the right-hand side was this huge wall that was full of all these scrolls, millions and millions of these scrolls. And my guide, Alan, said everybody who was having a life at this time, which was back in 1987, everybody had these scrolls on the wall. So when they finish their life, they come back here and they get their scroll to see how they did. Well, before we left that building, he takes me to another area that was this huge, gigantic library. And I walk in, and there's all these bookshelves and all these books, but all the books look the same. He walks me up to this book, and I look at it, and it said Nina, Nina. And he said, your soulmate's name is Nina. And then he explained to me, because I had never heard the term soulmate. I didn't even know what that was. But he explained to me that when God created us, he created every single one of us with a perfect mate. And these books, these encyclopedia books, have everything about that soul. The kind of gifts they were created with, because we were all created with gifts, the different lifetimes that we've had, all the things that we've learned, all of that information is in every one of these books. And every single one of us has a soulmate. He takes me to this other building, and this one didn't have any marble or any kind of, it wasn't white marble, it was like steel, beautiful, pristine steel. And it was a stadium. It looked like a stadium where we would go to have, like to watch a football game or a soccer game, something like that. And he takes me to the inside, and the inside, I notice immediately that all the lights are on, and this place is super bright, and there's all these chairs, thousands of seats in this building. And my guide told me this is a planetarium. Well, there was a gentleman behind me, and he knew everything about astronomy, and he ran the planetarium. On the other side, all of us pursued the different types of work that we love to do, and they're all related to the gifts that God gave us. So the people that were in the orientation center I talked about earlier, they love counseling. That's what they do on the other side. The gentleman that was behind me in the planetarium, he loved to talk about astronomy. He just loved it. And he said to me, he said, let's begin. And all of a sudden, all the lights went off. It was pitch black. And I sit down, and he said to me, when you look at the stars, this is what you see. And he was talking about all the people on Earth at that time, which was back in 1987. When we go outside and look at the stars, this is what we see. And all of a sudden, our sun showed up, our star. And then Mercury, then Venus, Mars, Neptune, Saturn, Uranus, all the planets in our solar system. And then they disappeared. And then he said, when we look at the stars, this is what we see. And what he meant by that was everybody on the other side at that time, at their level of knowledge and development, this is what they see when they look at the stars. And all of a sudden, planet after planet after planet started showing up. First, it was dozens, then hundreds, then thousands and millions of other planets. And he said to me, there is far more life in the universe than you can possibly imagine. My guide said, Earth is not the only planet that's inhabited. There are millions and millions of other worlds. And he also said, Earth is not the only planet that we can have lifetimes on. There are virtually unlimited other worlds. We leave that building, and this next place he takes me to is the biggest building so far that I saw. It was this huge white marble building. It went so far that I could not see the end of it. It would take days and days to get to the end of this building. Well, there were no columns on the sides. There were just columns in the front with all of these steps leading up to it. And it looked like our Supreme Court building in Washington, D.C. It looked just like that, only infinitesimally bigger. So we go up the stairs, we walk in, and I noticed that it's this huge library, tall 20, 30-foot bookshelves, books everywhere. All these people were there. People were studying. People were reading. People were visiting, looking for books. And there were study rooms that we would call study rooms today. And he walks me up to this one study room, and there was a woman sitting there. She had jet black hair straight down to her waist. She had her back to me. She was sitting on a couch, and she had some kind of a purplish kind of a gown that she was wearing, like a robe of some kind. And she was watching something on the wall. She was watching what we would call a flat screen television mounted on the wall in front of her. And my guide said, look closer and see what she's watching. So I get closer, and she was watching a battle that was taking place between Native American Indians on horseback and United States cavalry on horseback. And I thought she was watching a movie. But my guide said she was watching history of a battle that took place over 200 years ago here on Earth. And I said, that's impossible. We didn't have video cameras back then. How could she possibly be watching something that happened all those years in the past? And my guide said, everything gets recorded. And I don't know what the mechanism is for that other than God. I can't explain how it's possible that everything in history gets recorded, but it does. So on the other side, if you wanted to learn about something like this woman here, she wanted to learn about Native American history so she could go and actually watch history. And any of us can do the same thing. We can go learn about World War II. We can learn about the Peloponnesian War. You can watch somebody's life. You could watch the life of Mother Teresa or Martin Luther King Jr. as a way to learn. The next place he takes me to is a castle, and a castle just like you would see in France or England. This beautiful stone castle. And my guide said, let's walk in. So we walk inside the castle, and the first thing I notice is there's this sprawling red carpet, beautiful red color, and it made you feel like royalty. And that was the idea of this castle, that you could walk here, you could see how people lived in medieval Europe. Well, on either side of me were these huge walls going down, like blocks down, this huge castle. And on the walls, there were life-size paintings. And there were life-size paintings of people that were royalty who had lived during that time period. Like King George, Queen Anne, all these people had life-size portraits, pictures of what they looked like, and the clothes that they wore back then. Well, in front of every one of these pictures, there was a podium. And on top of this podium was a book. And this book contained everything about that person's lifetime. So if you're on the other side and you wanted to learn about life in medieval Europe on Earth, you could come to this castle, you could see what they lived in, you could look at their paintings to see what they looked like, and you could also read about them on these books. They were on top of these podiums. Well, just then, something catches my attention. On the right-hand side, I look over, and there's a woman who was walking down this stairwell. She walks up to me and she said, "Is there anything I can help you find?" I didn't know what to say. So I said the stupidest thing. I said, "No thanks, I'm just looking." The next place we go to, this is the end of my NDE. He takes me to a meadow, the most beautiful meadow I have ever seen. I've never seen anything like it here on Earth. Rolling hills, beautiful green grass, wildflowers. It was a perfect sunshiny day, not a cloud in the sky. And then my guide Alan left. So I thought I was standing in this meadow by myself. So I turn around to look at the rest of the meadow, and there was a gentleman standing right in front of me. He was wearing a kind of a beautiful white golden robe with a golden sash around the waist, and he had sandals that laced up his calves, kind of gold-colored sandals. And I knew, he didn't tell me, but I knew this was the being that we know as Jesus. And when I looked at his face, it was like all of this light was coming out of him. He was different than everybody else I saw. All of this light was coming out, and I could not see his features. It was like shards of lightning just pouring out of him. So I'm standing there, and he talks to me, and he said, "You must tell them there is no death." And the second he said that, I woke back up in that operating room. Ever since then, I have always tried to share my story. I want people to know that there is nothing to be afraid of about dying. In fact, our last day here on Earth will be our happiest day, because that's the day we go home.